So we're going to turn now to our keynote speaker. Dr. Richard Smith is a graduate of then Western Maryland College, now McDaniel College. He and I have in common that we both graduated before the name change. I, however, had to be president of the Alumni Association during the name change, so that was quite the experience. But you all know McDaniel, it's up on the hill at the end of town. And Dr. Smith obviously went on from Western Maryland College, received a PhD from Temple University, and he focuses his research collaborations that he does with students, which I think is a really important part of higher education these days. Dr. Smith likes to work with students on analyzing the intersection of race and religion, the influence of black clergy, and American evangelicalism. He teaches courses on topics that include introductory sociology, religion and society, and racial and ethnic relations. His courses get rave reviews from his students. During the break, we were talking about how one student wanted to know why one of his courses wasn't required for everybody, and we were trying to figure out how Richard could teach all 1,900 students during their time there, and decided, okay, maybe we can't put that whole responsibility on him. But today he's going to talk about some of his ideas on poverty. So, Dr. Smith, I'm going to turn this over to you, and hopefully we'll have time at the end of his talk for a few questions.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, Pam and Carroll citizens for racial equality. It's an honor to be here, and I thank you for inviting me to be here with you. I also want to say this before I get into what I have for today, is that I'm really honored to be standing here amongst you. And I say that because I'm an academic, I lived some of this stuff, but you all are in the trenches every single day. I was just sharing with Marty, he was saying, he's part of the social work. He teaches in the social work department at our college, and I shared with him, oh, that's great, we're connected, because I talk about it and you actually do it. So I want you to know, as I stand up here and I share with you today, that I'm fully aware of all that you do and how much you put into fighting against poverty and other issues. And I feel like the least amongst you. But I'm just going to share a few thoughts, and I hope that you'll allow me to do so today. Also, just very quickly, want to apologize to you for not being able to be a part of the whole program today. That was actually my desire. But I didn't realize until it was too late that today is actually my son's birthday. So I actually had to celebrate with him. He's 4, he turned 4 today. So I had to celebrate with him, and he sung the song to himself, happy birthday song to himself. So I had to stand there and listen and watch him open his presents. And then I promised him I will be back as soon as I can so that we can kind of have a good time together. It's something that my children, I have 3 of them, my children look forward to, obviously their birthdays, but I look forward to being able to spend time with them as well on their birthdays and celebrate with them. So I apologize ahead of time for not fully being a part of the program. It was my heart's desire, but my son wouldn't allow it. Okay, so I apologize. All right, so today I just want to share a little bit about my background, and this talk today is going to be personal as well as statistical. There's going to be some data thrown in there. As a social scientist, I have to always throw some percentages and numbers out there. But also, this talk will be ideological. There's some ideas I have, and many people say, oh, you're just, that's wild, that's crazy, that'll never happen. Quite possibly, it won't. But at least I could say that I'm going to continue to fight for these ideological changes. So I just want to prepare you ahead of time. And then also, I'm a race scholar. So at some point, I'm going to talk about race in here. So I'm just warning you now. that there will be something about race and racism in my talk, all right? And then finally, I want to say, before I get into the meat of what I have to say today, is that I already mentioned that I graduated Western Maryland College, now McDaniel College. I'm now a faculty member, have recently been promoted, as well as received tenure, so I'm excited about that. And also, thank you. And then also, my connection to Carroll County wasn't limited to that time period. In fact, years ago, probably when I was around the age of my son, probably about 4 to 9, I actually used to travel out here every week, and I would travel to a church, actually. That is not the actual picture of the church, but kind of looks like what the church looked like back then, at least to me. It was actually smaller. I would say actually half this size. And it was in Union Bridge, Maryland. Anyone from Union Bridge? So it was in Union Bridge, Maryland. We would travel from Baltimore to go to Union Bridge because my grandfather was helping out some way there. I just remember traveling there with him and being in that building and recognizing that even at a young age, even though we were singing songs to Zion and we were enjoying our time in the Lord and fellowshipping around the Word and all that good stuff, recognizing that there was something different about us. There was something very different about us than about everyone else that at least I saw at that young age. And I quite wondered at times, why is everybody so happy, even though they're so poor? Why is it that everyone's so excited and so focused on kind of that this is a good life and everything's okay, even though there was such poverty around me as well as in my family? I remember eating government cheese. They don't have that anymore. But eating government cheese and powdered milk and powdered eggs and all that stuff, as a young child. So I noticed this, and I noticed that in this church, even though it was poor and the people in there were poor, a way to cope with the issues was the same. And was to find a different way to figure out why we are here. Why is our lives just as important as anyone else's? So it was from kind of that background, that upbringing, where I really recognized or came to a sense that, it's one thing for us to cope in a church, but how do other people cope with this? And then how do people that are outsiders view others who are dealing with issues of poverty? I like this Frederick Douglass quote that you have up here. It says, "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe." When we feel like there's something or someone is different because of being in poverty, then really none of us are safe. So in 2014, some of you remember this, we celebrated 50 years war on poverty. 50 years. Now, how successful have we been? Has it been successful? Any thoughts, just very quickly? How many people successful? No? Some say
yes, some ways no.
some ways. How? If you don't mind me asking. I'm in agreement with you, but go ahead.
Well, from what I see here in Carroll County, I see that we have many resources that we didn't have then.
Yeah.
And I see, even though racism is still there, I think there's a big improvement. Of course, I came from Georgia, so just coming here, was a difference. But even here, in the years I've been here, and I've been here a long time now, I see a difference. I see an improvement.
Okay.
I think we're making strides. We're not there,
Sure.
but I think we've made strides in the 50 years.
Sure. Yeah.
For a number of years, I've worked in the soup kitchen at my church right here in town. And I would say 5, 10 years ago, we were serving on average maybe 60 or 70 people. And in the basement of that church. And today, last Sunday, 160 meals. I see the number of baby carriages coming in to that soup kitchen that I didn't see 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I see the number of what in our agency we call transitional age youth, 18 to 25. More of those young people on our streets, more of them in our soup kitchens, more of them involved in substance abuse, mental health issues. So it's hard for me as a longtime resident of Carroll County to not think that poverty is more than ever a dilemma, a challenge for our community. Although I do agree about the resources that have been developed over a period of time here.
So, yes.
I don't think there's been a lot of progress because I think the federal government hasn't been bold enough to define poverty in real terms. The federal poverty level, I think, is a joke. When you set the poverty level at such a low bar, well then yes, you can make the statistics work the way that to make them sound better. But if we actually set the poverty level at a rate, from the federal government, where we would actually measure how much money are you spending on housing, how much of your income are you spending on health care and child care, then we would get a completely different picture of those who are in poverty.
Exactly the case. President Johnson, when he made that statement that we're going to have an unconditional war on poverty, at that time, poverty rate, the so-called poverty rate, was about 19–20%. And that's 1 out of 5. And we could look at that and say, okay, well, it was 1 out of 5 then. And if we look at today, we could see that some of the programs that he put into place, or at least his initiatives that he put into place, are still in existence. 11 out of 12 of the initial government programs still exist, such as Medicare, Medicaid, and Head Start. Also, we could look at lower infant mortality rates. We can also look at the fact that there seem to be lower poverty rates. But again, that question, have we been successful in the war on poverty? Well, if we look at what Lyndon B. Johnson aimed, or what his goal was, you can see right here it says, our aim is not only to relieve the symptom of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, to prevent it. There's the problem. We have not prevented it. We have not cured it. We have not ended it. In fact, some would argue, and I would agree, that we have maintained it. We have created a system where instead of instead of providing services or things necessary in order to help people to achieve a higher level of livelihood, what we have done is created instead a baseline that causes people or maintains people right where they are. In fact, from the beginning, some scholars would argue that the war on drugs was never really fully, war on drugs. I was talking about that last week. So the war on poverty was never fully funded. And there's many different reasons why this war was never fully funded. There was other wars that were more important and more necessary, such as the Vietnam War. I mean, that was a worthy cause, wasn't it? Of course, right? So as soon as we really got entrenched into the Vietnam War, it pretty much gutted a number of the programs that were put into place. But then there was another war later on that was so necessary. That was the war on drugs. That was so important. And President Ronald Reagan, when he said we are starting the war on drugs in 1982, very few people even cared about drugs. In other words, many people didn't even see drugs as a major issue, and crack cocaine didn't become a major issue in inner cities until 1984, 2 years after he made that statement about the war on drugs. But yet, it was much more necessary, and millions upon millions of dollars have went into the war on drugs. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then, of course, if we talk about more recent times, the war on terror. Of course, that's more important. than this war on poverty and the billions upon billions of dollars that we poured into this war on terror. But there's another major war that has really taken a toll on the war on drugs, and that war is the ideological war against drugs. Or we could say this, drugs, my goodness. War on poverty, forgive me. The war on poverty. And what that is, this ideological war, this backlash that continues. There's a current backlash, a continual backlash against those who are impoverished, against services that are put into place to help those that are impoverished, a continual backlash ideologically about the people who are impoverished, so that when we have discussions about poverty, one of the things that come up oftentimes in my classes or in other discussions, well, what about those people that take advantage of the system? What about those people that are out there, all they're doing with the money is getting drugs? What about those people that are out there? And we have this ideological perception, or this perception of people who are impoverished, that's very different from what statistics show. So this war on drugs, war on poverty is quite, I don't want to say it's failed, but it hasn't been successful. And we know that because over 46 million Americans continue to live in poverty today. Just to give you kind of a visual indication of what that is, and this may have been talked about earlier, I don't know. But if you take the population in Nevada, New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah, Arizona, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and don't mess with Texas. For all those populations together, that's approximately 46 million Americans. All these people that are still living in poverty. And that does not account for those who are living close to poverty. In other words, they're just making enough to live above the line, but yet they're still having a difficult time making it. About 33 to 35% of Americans live in relative poverty. In fact, 7% to 10% of Americans live in extreme poverty. So relative poverty is those who are right above the so-called poverty line, but below twice the amount of the poverty line. The extreme poverty are those who are at 50% of the poverty line, or below the poverty line. So in 1964, we had 1 out of 5 Americans lived in poverty. We're now at 1 out of 6, 1 out of every 6. We also have 29% of people with a disability that live in poverty. We have 31% who are single parents. We're talking about mother-headed homes. 21% of children, or 1 out of every 5 children that currently live in poverty. Then, of course, I told you I'm going to throw some race in here. We look at race, 27% of indigenous people, 26% of African Americans. We also have 24% Hispanic Latino, 12% Asian, as well as 10% white. There's something racially that's going on here as well. We haven't been as successful as we had hoped to be. If we look at even wealth, the wealth gap, even those who, when we think about wealth and what we own versus what we owe, we still see there's great challenges in what we have by race. I'm sorry these numbers look kind of fuzzy now. But you would notice wealth gap drastically different between whites, Hispanics, and African Americans. But let's bring it closer to home. Let's talk about Maryland, Carroll County. That's what we came to talk about a little bit. So in Maryland, in Carroll County, there's something about Maryland, and there's something specific about Carroll County when we look at the poverty or poverty rate in Maryland as well as in Carroll County. And some people might get excited actually when we look at these rates and look at where we are positioned in our country. So we're number 2, meaning that we are the second wealthiest state in our country. We used to be first, but I believe New Hampshire beat us out. So I don't know why, but they just beat us. But we're number 2, and another way to look at this, we have the second lowest poverty rate in the country. But also Carroll County is number 2 in the state have the second lowest poverty rate. So Maryland poverty rate is about 10.1%. In Carroll County, the poverty rate is around between 5 and 6%, but depending on if you look at the Census Bureau or the Maryland statistics. Maryland has it a little less than the U.S. government. I don't know why that's the case either, but it seems there's a little less there. But it seems like there's something that's going on. There's something better about Maryland, that we're doing our part, and things are great because we don't have as much poverty as other countries. There's something about this county. We don't have as much poverty as other counties, but I don't want to stop there. Nelson Mandela said it this way: as long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest. Poverty exists. And if we have one person that's living in poverty, we have a problem. In Carroll County, there's a little over 167,000 people as far as population. When it comes to those who are impoverished or poverty line, below the poverty line, there's approximately 8,000 to 9,000 people that live in poverty within Carroll County. Again, if we look at those who are close to poverty, that number expands to close to 15,000. So still, there's a great number of people who continue to live in poverty. So again, remember the goal of the war on poverty. Our aim is not only to relieve the symptom of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, to prevent it. You know, it was very difficult to really find, and some of you might have this, I don't know, but for me, it was very difficult to find specific data about Carroll County, about Westminster, as far as poverty by race and by different demographics, especially since Carroll County is about 92% white. The numbers are extremely small in order to get a measure by race. So it was very difficult to measure that, to show kind of the different demographics. But what we have to recognize, or what I wanted to kind of present to you, is some anecdotal evidence of poverty. Even though I kind of made the joke that as a social scientist, a sociologist, you know, we talk about it, where social workers actually do something about it. Quite often, I've had opportunity to speak to people and to hear about the difficulties with living in poverty. You know, and it's, yes, there's money, there's food, but also there's character assassination. There's the difficulties of walking into agencies and being treated as if you're nothing. There's the difficulty of just wanting to be a part of something or included in something, but yet because you're one of those people, you're not included as well. So I've heard numerous stories, even from students who had to live homeless, had to drop out of school. They were getting aid to go to school, and they had to drop out of school, come to find out later on they were homeless for a whole semester. And these stories that I hear constantly, you know, it just burns me up inside because I remember what it was like personally. I remember the feeling of not being good enough, you know, not being able to be like everyone else, not being able to have what I want, not being able to live freely the way I want to live freely. So with that being said, I want to just, as the beginning said, these are just some thoughts, my thoughts. And I wanted to just put out there some solutions as far as the war on poverty. And of course, this is debatable. But I think we need to fully fund and expand social programs. Social programs have helped, as you know. They do help. They don't cure, but they help. There has been some debate politically about if social programs really help, especially if you look at the war on poverty and how when President Johnson, when he started the war on poverty, there was already a decrease happening in poverty rates. So people said, well, if you look, you see the programs come in, and as a result, that decrease stopped or was hindered. We don't see that same decrease, and the programs have stopped everything. Well, again, what we're looking at is not necessarily just maintaining people, but trying to find ways to end it. And these social programs help to end poverty. Also enforce policies that we already have. Enforce policies that are already in place. Policies that are in place, or at least to not only enforce, but pass policies that are necessary in place. President Obama had come up with several policies that were unable to be either passed or fully funded as a result of kind of the political backlash that we continue to see. And then, of course, encourage personal creativity and achievement. And again, this comes from my own personal view that people are and can do great things no matter where they are in life or what station they are in life. Now, this is obvious, right? I mean, what I said is not necessarily anything new. It's not things that are not happening. So let me share with you two other pieces that will that I want to kind of end off with today. And the first is this: the ideological war against poverty. We have to end the ideological war against poverty, the us versus them, the characterization of people living in poverty. Are there people that take advantage of the system? Sure, but there's a small number of people. It's not the majority. Studies show that, for example, most people who are homeless work or try to work, okay? Even though the outside belief is that people who are poor or who are homeless do not work. So we need to fight against this ideological war against poverty. I like this quote. It says, poverty is not a lack of character, it's a lack of money, a lack of opportunity, a lack of investment. It's when society turns its back and makes you invisible. The other quote I want to put up here is by James Baldwin. Anyone who has struggled with poverty knows how extremely expensive it is to be poor. Now think about that. Anyone who struggled with poverty knows how expensive it is to be poor. Now, there's a book that I've read years ago by Raymond and Leighton. The rich get richer and the poor get prison. And in this ideological war, because of the characterization of those who are poor, what we find is that there's a criminalization of those who are poor. But not only that, there is inequality or unjust treatment of those who are poor in the criminal justice system. And we need to fight against that. We need to find ways to fight against that inequality. A lot of things that we do not see, a lot of things we do not hear about, a lot of things that happen in rooms, in small rooms, that continues this inequality. But there's also one more issue that we need to address, not only the ideological war on poverty, but race. Now, I told you I'm a race scholar. I told you it was coming, so I prepared you. We have to deal with race in our country. We cannot give up on it. A lot of my colleagues, well, not a lot, but some of my colleagues would possibly argue against me and say, no, it's all class. But if we look at the history of American society, one of the prominent issues that has a connection to many of the different issues we face today is the racial division that we have in our society. When we talk about race, we could look at poverty, and what you will see in America is that there's a great disparity in who is impoverished, as well as access to different things such as healthcare, access to food, based upon race. So we need to really address racial division. We need to look at this and stop hiding under a rug. We cannot have a universal policy to fix issues that are different based on race. My school was at Temple University Graduate School. I went to Temple University, as was mentioned earlier. And if anyone familiar with Philadelphia? Anyone? Anyone familiar with North Philadelphia? Okay, so that's where Temple University is. It's in North Philadelphia. Now, if you're not from Philadelphia or not familiar with Philadelphia, North Philadelphia was kind of, and still is, the place where people look down on, okay, because it's the impoverished areas. A lot of people that look like me that live there, that are poor. And not only that, it's really a distressed area. So many people would opt not to, if they could, live in North Philadelphia or go to North Philadelphia. But Temple has found itself in North Philadelphia, and well, they're buying up a lot of the stuff around it, so they're kind of making a little haven there for themselves. I guess that can be cut later. But but what has happened at Temple University, and what's very interesting, is that Temple University is here, and it has all these nice stores, all these great things. But when you go deeper in North Philadelphia, there was one grocery store, at least when I was there. And that grocery store was called Supremos. Anyone ever heard Supremos? Me either. I've never heard of Supremos. I have no clue. I was just like, what is Supremos? And at the time, my wife and I, we were living right outside of Philadelphia, close to Lower Merion, not in Lower Merion, but close to Lower Merion. And Lower Merion is a more wealthier area. Okay? It's close to St. Joseph University, to kind of, if you're familiar with St. Joseph's. So there they have places like Whole Foods, Trader Joe's. They had this one store I never heard of, and when in it, I had to walk out because there was nothing in there I could purchase. I mean, gum was like $20. It was just ridiculous. But they have all these beautiful stores. But in North Philadelphia, they had one store. I went into this grocery store, and it amazed me as I went in because I was just thinking about the Whole Foods that I went to the other day. And in Whole Foods, if you've ever been to Whole Foods, it looks like they spit shine their fruit and vegetables. I mean, you walk in, it's beautiful. You're like, wow, look at all this good food, you know. But in Supremos, it looked like they play kickball with their food or something. I mean, the groceries, the produce was just so badly damaged. And this is what people had access to. Not only that, not only was it so badly damaged, but they had processed food. I mean, there was very little. The little fresh food they had looked like it was so damaged, so bruised, that many people who have more money would not eat it. And then besides that, everything else was processed. And this was the one store. I believe there's more now, but this was the one store in North Philadelphia, in an area that was dominated by African Americans. There's something wrong. There's something wrong when we have a place where you only have access to one store, and the store you have access to is very limited. But there's another component of race. So we have the racial disparities that we see. But also there's another component of race that I want to end with and talk about today. And that's what is called the wages of whiteness. Du Bois called it the psychological wage of whiteness. And let me explain why that's an issue and something that needs to be combated. Because historically, during the colonial period in our country, what you will find is that the enslaved and the African Americans or Africans, people of African descent that were indentured, were in a sense really one step below indentured white servants, just one step below. They had community together. They played together. They partied together. They commiserated. But then, after time, instead of building a class connection, instead of building a connection where we are partners because we all are getting messed over by the same group, elite white males, we're getting messed over by them too. Those colonists who were in power, those landowners, put into place something called white or whiteness. And this whiteness allowed those who were also poor and white to connect racially with those who were above. And by connecting racially with those who were messing them over, those who were taking advantage of them, those who were destroying them, and they started pointing the finger not up at those people who were financially above them, they started pointing the finger over and across at those who were beside them. In fact, I agree with Tim Wise, the great social thinker. If you haven't heard of Tim Wise, please look him up. He said, today we're seeing something that connects with the historical problems that we see in our country. If we look at our political arena, we have an extremely wealthy white male telling working class and poor white Americans that all the problems that they have is because of black and brown people. That is something that's not new. That has been with us since the beginning of our nation, where instead of joining with those who are alongside us that are going through the same thing with us, we have continued in this construction and continue to put race, whiteness, over class. So what scholars have argued is that instead of fighting solely about more money, we also need to fight against these racial ideologies that continue to persist, where people who are poor, white Americans who are poor, impoverished, are getting screwed over, just like everyone else. And they're being told that it's someone else's fault and not truly the fault of those who are actually in power. Here's an image, and I want to prepare you for this image. It has some language on it that I want to show you that I don't particularly use quite often, but this image I thought was a kind of a good way to sum this up. If you notice in this image, you have a person of color, African American, and you have a white, and they're both carrying people of wealth on their backs. And they're both trying to reach out to each other because they have a common bond. They're both working class. They're both poor. They're both struggling. And it says, as you see, workers of the world, unite. But those who have the power to continue the racist ideologies that we hear and see, especially in our political atmosphere today, continue to play racial politics and cause us to divide. What happens? When we divide, we're unable to fully fight against the system that is confining all of us who are impoverished and working class. When we stay divided, we stay conquered. So we have to figure out ways to fight against this racial ideology. Nelson Mandela said it this way: poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. Again, programs, policies, but also fighting against the ideological wars that exist, fighting against the racial divisions that exist, and not allowing racist ideology or racist politics to continue to keep us divided, but recognizing we're connected on class. That my success and your success should both be championed and both be celebrated. I'm gonna end with these words. The idea that so many children are born into poverty in the wealthiest nation on the earth is heartbreaking enough. But the idea that a child may never be able to escape that poverty because she lacks a decent education or health care, or a community that views her future as their own, that should offend all of us, and it should compel us to action. We are a better country than this. Thank you.
Wow, that was a great hour and a half. And just as a little token, a certificate of thanks for you, Dr. Smith, from CCRE. Can we have another round of applause for Dr. Smith? He was very gracious. Usually when we get in touch with potential speakers, they say, well, let me look at this. And Dr. Smith said, well, I'd really like to do this. So we really appreciate your enthusiasm and willingness to be here and to spend so much time answering questions. And we'll let you know when we meet. Maybe we can get you to come back with us. Alrighty, now I just want to close out with two things. One, to echo a little bit about what Dr. Smith said and young people. And racial issues. It's been about a year and a half since 4 high school students from this county burned a cross on the driveway of an African-American family's home. Some of us were involved in working with the young folks that did that. And it was clear that the circumstances in which they put that cross together had to have involved adults in our community. So, we have a racial issue in Carroll County, and I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone. And when it reaches pervasive levels at some points in time, it isn't surprising that young people express those same views. And so I think we have a lot of work to do with young people to reflect that there is another view, another perspective about people who might be different from them. And the other, to wrap up this last conversation, I'm reminded, who here knows what the golden rule is? Somebody tell me the golden rule. Yeah. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that's often what we think about. Is there a problem with that? What's the problem?
They may not want what you want.
Exactly. And I think when we try to help people, we help them by doing what we think we would want someone to do for us. But in a way, that turns the helping situation into being all about me. I'm going to do what I would want to have done. And we often forget to ask, as our last speaker said, what do you want? What do you need? We forget to empower people that we see as being in a more difficult situation than we are. We forget to empower those people to make their own decisions, and sometimes they're not going to be the decisions we would make. But that doesn't mean we should turn away. And I think very often we take that as meaning, oh, there's nothing I can do, I'm just backing away from this situation. So, remember that we need to take that golden rule a step further to where it's not all about me, but it's about the person that we're interacting with. So I just like to throw that out at some of these conferences for folks to think about, because it's only a little tweak. But in any given situation, it can make all the difference.